Hello, and welcome to the June 2021 edition of What It's Like to Live with a Classic Mini. In this series, I go through what it's like living with my Classic Mini in Toronto, including the costs and the repairs. This month, I did a mini service on the car. So, I did an oil change, and what I like to do here is to make sure that I raise the car both on the front and the back and make sure that the car's level. Of course, I took it for a very short run just to warm the oil up before I started. I undid the sump plug, making sure to apply inwards pressure towards the block and then releasing it at the end to release the fluid. Then I replaced the copper washer on the sump plug. Next is to get access to the oil filter, so I removed the grill and then removed the filter by hand. I also make sure that I put rare earth magnets on the filter to try and catch any loose pieces of metal. Then I go through and fill it up with about 4.5 to 5 litres of oil. Whilst I was waiting for the oil to settle, I also did basic checks like the lights. I made sure that I recycled my oil. It only cost 86 Canadian dollars for oil filter to do this service. I also replaced the spark plugs, and on an SPI Mini this is quite a difficult job. First you have to remove the coil to get access to the spark plug at the number 4 cylinder. Then, using a breaker bar and some light pressure, I'm able to remove the spark plugs. Spark plug number 1 on an SPI Mini with air conditioning is very tough to get to. I have one socket that is able to get in there. Then I release by hand to try and reduce any damage to any of the threads. As you can see, access is quite limited on these SPI Minis with air conditioning. Before I removed the plugs, I made sure to clean any debris from around the plug hole, and when the plugs are out, also give it a good wipe and a good clean to make sure everything is okay. I use a bit of brake clean on a blue rag. It's a good solvent to help clean the engine bay a little. Next I inspected the plugs. They are actually pretty good. These were the condition of the plugs, and I was very happy with them, and I classified them as normal. I also gapped the plugs at 0.8mm. This is in accordance with the Haynes manual. I used BPR6 ES plugs, and I got these from the local Canadian tyre store. Gapping the plugs is a relatively straightforward task of making sure the gap is appropriate, and if not, either light lever to increase the gap or a bit of a tap to reduce the gap. I tried to make sure I put a little bit of copper grease on the threads. This helps make sure that I keep the threads nice and lubricated so that I can remove them when it comes to replacing them next time. Next is a simple case of reinstalling, and again I tried to make sure that I get a good thread, doing it by hand first to avoid any cross threading into the block. Then I torque up. However, typically I can only torque plugs 3 and 4. number 2 and number 1, I just nip them up. I make sure I give the coil leads a clean. This helps identify if there are any cracks. I check the coil ends to make sure the condition of them was good. I reattach the leads. I've marked each lead to the corresponding cylinder that it relates to make sure I don't get any in the wrong order. I also checked the coolant, and the coolant was a little bit low, and as summers are very hot here in Toronto, I only topped it up with distilled water. I've installed a K&N air filter on my car. Last thing to do is to start the car, and specifically here we're watching for the oil light to make sure the oil light distinguishes quickly, which it did. I also checked the pressure of the tyres, and mine were in accordance with the Haynes manual, so I didn't make any changes. So, let's look at the numbers for June. Looking at the dashboard for June, you can see the first page is the Sykes readings here. I took 4 readings in June, and actually I'm pretty happy. One thing I would definitely say is when the idle switch turns off, the running of the car is much easier. I'd love to get to the bottom of why on some occasion it doesn't, because there's definitely a correlation between this and the car running lumpy. Looking at the spend, you may recall from the May 2021 vlog that the car had gone to a local mini specialist to get the steering rack replaced. Well, the replacement of the rack plus the alignment cost me $1,000 pretty much. Looking at the distance travelled this month, you can see on the distance and MPG that I've actually combined 2 months into one here and just averaged them, and you can see that the distance travelled was fairly typical, but the fuel economy was very good. You can see on a UK measure, I'm actually getting almost 34 miles per gallon. Very happy with that. Then last thing to show you is I took a short drive up Yonge Street. Yonge Street is one of the longest streets in the world. So I'll leave you with some of the footage. Even came across a pub with a cool name. And you basically can go from the middle of the city into the countryside. It's quite a nice drive, lots of variation. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.